today is Starlink. I've spoken about Starlink before, and I wish to, of course, bring it up to date as to what's happening now, because this project got going in 2019. And that means that it's a fairly new and recent sort of undertaken as tech projects go. And Starlink is one of the most important projects, in my opinion, simply because it has to do with bringing about communication between everyone. Through Zoom we do today. But if you want to communicate with somebody who's on the other side of the world, perhaps not able to have these sort of Zoom facilities and so on, this Starlink will enable them to do that, because it's going to bring in something called the space internet. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it's a very important thing because, as we know, half the world doesn't have connectivity. Therefore, to be able to provide that connectivity to those difficult areas of the world is the object of this particular project. And this vision of Elon Musk, I think, again, is very commendable, as his other visions are as well, as we can see from the agenda that we're going to be covering here. I'll just do the recap, which is going to essentially talk about the overall context. And then what Starlink is, that will go into a little bit more detail, and its present status right now. Because as I said, it just started about 2 years ago, and it's making a lot of headway. And we'll be also answering the question why it is important to the world. Because, our world is getting, in some ways, smaller, but again, in some ways, more distant. Distant simply because we have a lack of connectivity. Once we bring in that connectivity, then, of course, we are going to be much closer. And then we'll talk a little bit about the configuration. What are the mechanics of this project? And then, of course, a little bit about the financials as to what's the affordability and what the costs are. So let's get into the first part, which is the recap. Now, as we know, the purpose of these talks that I do is really nominally called stories behind the headlines. But the aim is really to try and bring a big focus on stories which are important to our lives and which are not reported as much. They don't get that much coverage because it's probably not sensational news and what have you, or sell papers, on the high street or wherever they sell papers. So it is that idea that we need to cover information and issues which are not as well covered as they should be. And that is why we have talked about China, because China doesn't get a good coverage either. And if it does get coverage, it's sort of rather sort of negative coverage. And then technology, a lot of people think it's too fiddly and therefore not really of interest, because we talk a little bit about the mechanics of it. And then, of course, there are the other things like infrastructure and so on that we talked about many times. So in a way, this is part of the infrastructure. If you talk about internet nowadays, it's like a utility. And it is so essential to our lives. When internet goes down, we are all over the place. We have to run it out quite a bit and so on. And we try and get that up and running very quickly when it comes down. So it is part of our infrastructure for our daily lives now. To that extent, I think it is very important to see which way it's headed and what can we look forward to in terms of the developments that are taking place. So let's then see what it is that it's about. Well, the project is, of course, of Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk has these grand ideas. A lot of people didn't take him too seriously because his sort of vision was so extensive and vast, people sort of said, well, that's not going to be happening. But he's one of those people that has started to deliver. And I think it's very important that we are able to, understand that vision. And that vision, in my opinion, is really for the good of humanity as a whole. So this project called Starlink has become a real company on its own. It's still part of SpaceX. SpaceX, I talked about, I think, last week or the week before. It's still the big project under which this is a little activity that is being sort of pursued simply because it has the possibility of using these reusable rockets. Because without rockets, you can't put up these satellites. And without satellites, you can't have this type of communication. And then, of course, that is why it's still part of it. It might be spun off as a separate entity sooner or later, and I'll talk about that later. Now, here is this, the project. The project, what is it? It's rebuilding the internet in space. Now, when we talk about, internet and we talk about space, these again are not commonly sort of understood in terms of what it is. But it is a way of trying to connect the internet, not through cables or dug in the road. I see in Camden nowadays, they're laying these fiber cables and they're digging up the roads everywhere. It's an expensive proposition, but you can't do this for all over the world. It's just not possible. So we have internet through cables at the moment, and within our homes we have Wi-Fi. So these cables bring in Wi-Fi, and we are able to sort of connect in any of our rooms and access any part of the internet. So we have to give that facility really to everybody on this earth easily and affordably, that can be afforded, especially in places that don't have it right now or where connectivity is very limited or very expensive. So we can think of Starlink as filling in the gaps between 5G and fiber and getting to the parts of the world that are the hardest to reach. Now, I'll talk about 5G just to mention what is it, because we've talked about it before. It's a higher speed type of connectivity like 4G we use our smartphones and so on using 4G. So it's an advance on that. And fiber, of course, we know is the cable that comes into our homes carrying very high speed internet. So now SpaceX is the company that is having Starlink under its wing. And it's going to be offering these broadband services by mid-2020. Now that's already here because that was last year. And already it has started to be tested out. And we are seeing talk about that. And this is where we are at the moment. So the status is that it's already operational under what is called a beta testing phase, which means not wholesale rollout to every point, but to connect a few good many thousand people to be undertaking that as and when the capacity of that network grows, then more and more people can be brought in. So we already have now this testing underway in 12 countries that is happening, even in UK. If you want to be able to link to Starlink, you can. How quickly they're going to give it depends on the waiting list. So there's so much demand for it. So there is the rocket that takes the satellite up and puts it into orbit. And these are the satellites. There's about 60 of them in here. So each line, if you like, is like a satellite. It goes when it goes up. Now, here is Elon Musk making the statement here. There is a huge demand, he says, a significant unmet demand for low-cost global broadband capabilities. So that is what his vision is, and that's what he's delivering with his reusable rockets and having so many of these satellites put up. And we'll see how many need to be put up. Now, this is the internet penetration, if you like, globally. If you like the green areas is where internet is available by and large. The rest of the darker areas are where there's little connectivity, especially the dark areas here. And the lighter areas have connectivity, depending on how dark it is, it's less accessible, let me put it that way. It's just a very broad global vision that we have of just the northern areas having a lot of connectivity, but the south doesn't have. So what is the promise of this coverage? Because, when we talk about global, we're talking big. And therefore, you need to go outside the traditional ground infrastructure that gives us the connectivity. Because if you're just talking about putting in cables all over the world to every sort of, house in the world, that's not going to happen. So we have to do it through, if you like, satellite, and using like a radio. Radio doesn't need cables to be connected to you. You just need to plug in and get the power, and the airwaves give you the programs coming in. So in a similar way, we're going to have internet coming over the airwaves for every part of the world. So that is what Starlink is all about. It's even remote areas like this, for instance, where there's hardly anything, no infrastructure, like this maybe village in Africa, perhaps, or even India. The only thing they can probably have is maybe they can buy a local battery, which and then have a dish that they can connect. So you get a little dish and a battery, and then you can connect your Wi-Fi or even your smartphone and your laptop to it if you get around to having all that. Currently, what we have, this connectivity coming through, is through these antennas. We talked about 4G, for instance. Now, we need to understand there are different types of networks available. One is the telephone network, and we are used to that because we've used phones over a number of years. Now, that network is served by our telecom companies, in our case here, BT, British Telecom, and they're able to sort of lay cables down to our homes, and the phone is connected. And that sort of connectivity is physical connectivity. Now, what happens is when we move upwards a little bit to, say, 2G, 3G, 4G, that's when you are able to start communicating not just through cables laying on the road, that are laid on the road or dug under the roads, but they can sort of go from one sort of dish to another, which could be through microwave, or very high frequency transmissions of signals, and that is that type of antenna there. You can put up these antennas in sort of some places in the countryside and so on, and that's usually what is happening through, in order to get the connectivity that you need, even for telephones now and for internet. So now the aim of this is the affordability, because we can provide technology to all places of the world, but if you can't make it affordable, then of course you're not able to sort of reach everybody. So this is the way that one can, where it says over here, SpaceX goal. SpaceX is talking here because under it is Starlink. Is to make the service available for the same price in all countries, with taxes and shipping being the only significant differences when converted from local currency to USD dollars. Starlink should be equally accessible to anybody with internet access. So here we are, again, the affordability criteria needs to be fulfilled in order to achieve your ambition. At the moment, we have satellites whizzing around, the Earth, not too many, just a few. And these are the companies that seem to be doing it. But there are about 36,000 kilometers up there, which is about 22,000 miles up. And what that actually means is that they're geocentric, which means that when they beam their signal down, it's to a particular area of the world. And because they're so high, they cover a large area. But what is also a problem with such a connectivity is because of the distance, there is something called latency, which means there's a delay, because the signal has to sort of go up and down, and that distance is significant in bringing about the delay. And we've talked about this in my earlier sort of talks as well. When you hear somebody, at the other end of the world being interviewed, what happens is there is a delay. You ask the question and there's a blank look at the other end, and then he sort of, as it were, wakes up and gives you the answer. So that is the delay. So, and of course, there are other sort of problems with that, weaker signals and weather affects it and so on. So in order to counter those the difficulties, if you like, this Starlink is going to be giving you a solution. So in terms of delay, you can see it's going to be down to milliseconds. It's not going to be 10 milliseconds. It's going to be about 20 to 40 milliseconds because of connectivity through all these boxes that you have to go through. But they achieved that through this distance here. They've lowered the orbital sort of height from 36,000 kilometers to 550 or 342 miles. So you can see it's a shorter distance than therefore the latency is reduced. Now this gives you a picture, really a technical picture here, that this 550 kilometers up there, it has a certain amount of coverage here, but the coverage is not as big as a geocentric satellite. So therefore you have to have many of these to be able to cover the whole world. Now here is just an explanation. Here's a satellite, and it takes only about 2 milliseconds to go up and 2 milliseconds to go down. So you can see it's going to be very, very fast if the satellite is in a lower orbit. Now this is just how you calculate the latency is essentially, you take the distance, which is at how high the satellite is, divided by the speed of light, and there you have it. So that gives you the latency. Now, there are going to be different types of levels of orbit. There's the LEO, as it's called, low Earth orbit. MEO is the mid, and the other one is GEO, which is the very high one. And those will cover the whole globe. Here's a picture of that network circling the Earth. And each of these points is a satellite. And these satellites are intelligent satellites. They're able to communicate with each other. And also, because there are going to be so many of them, they have their own intelligence to avoid each other, banging into each other or crashing into each other. So they are very sophisticated in that sense. And because of the software that they have, they're also very intelligent satellites. There's the network over here, and then the signal can go, very quick. And the signal is through laser between each of these satellites. And laser, of course, is light, and the light speed in that sort of half vacuum, as it were, is going to be very fast. Now, take an example of New York to London. What is going to be time taken for the signal to travel? In the case of the satellite, it's going to be Starlink here, 43 milliseconds. In the case of optical fiber, it's going to be 55. And we have an average of this today, which is about 76. So you can see through the satellite Starlink, you're going to practically reduce it nearly by half or even better. Now, here is London and here's New York. That's the cable. At the moment, you have between London and New York a cable across, laid across the Atlantic. And that's why you have a good connectivity between London and New York. In fact, you might say that before the connectivity was made available, which was fast, people took advantage in the time delay to be able to manipulate stock prices and buy and sell and so on. Now they can't do it so easily, especially when you've got these stock markets with, high-tech algorithms, which will spot even a few milliseconds of delay and buy and sell stock. So this is going to be, to a large extent, reduced as well when you get this global connectivity, which is really much, and the latency is low. These are the Atlantic cables at the moment between London and there's a Hibernia Express cable. This is the time for transiting. It's slower by about 30–40%. Now, this is a picture of the satellites that are going to be put up. There's going to be 7,500 of them, and there's another 4,000 of them. These together make 12,000 satellites, which are still at lower orbit, although it says higher here, but it's not going to be very much higher. Not like the geocentric, which is going to be 22,000 miles. This is going to be, say, 300 to 500, and this will be about 1,000 kilometers up. This is the connectivity. Here you can say they're communicating between each other. And of course, you can reprogram them because they have the intelligence software in them. So they are able to perform, quite good. Supposing if one fails, for instance, what happens is that immediately it recognizes when it doesn't get a signal back that it needs to connect to the next one that is close by and bypass this one. So they're very, very intelligent. And also from the point of view of space debris, because there's going to be about 42,000 of them, and FCC has already given approval, I think, for so many to be put up onto satellite. And you can put up so many of them simply because SpaceX has the reusable rockets. No other company would have been able to do that, because to just do a launch costs several $1 million. But with the reusable rockets, the SpaceX and Elon Musk can do it. Now here is the sort of path of the signal going in orbit here between satellites, between each. So you can see it's not a straight line. It picks up the most optimal path to be able to travel so that the speed of your downloads and uploads is going to be phenomenally sort of optimal and high. Now, this is a picture showing you that 2019 was the first time that started to put up the satellites into space. These are the Starlink satellites I'm talking about. And what we see here is a rocket that is a Falcon, a reusable rocket. And these are the satellites. They pack into this payload type here about 60 at a time. And right now, this is the target of 42,000. So far, they've put up nearly 2,000 at 60 at a launch. But with the Starship, which I talked about earlier on in the Space X talk that I did a couple of weeks ago, they can put up to 400 of these satellites at each time. So they'll be achieving these numbers fairly sort of soon, in the next couple of years at least. Now, the way that they have started as well to talk to other governments, because here we're talking about having to gain the permission. Now, US, of course, UK have already given permission to access these satellites, because we've got 12 governments which are already having this type of service. But the rest of the world will also need to give clearance in order to have that particular facility. And most governments, of course, will have it, because it means that they will have an infrastructure in their own country without having to pay for it. Otherwise, can you imagine that each country has to dig up these cables and take them to the villages and towns and so on? Now they can just simply sort of take a dish, point it to the heavens, and then you have the signal. So you can see the advantage. So a lot of governments will go for that. Now, this is the sort of little schematic here. Here's your home. You can have a dish on top of your roof there, connect to a satellite, and then it connects to the other sort of parts of the service provider. That's the ground services that you need. This is the antenna that is going to be all that is required for your home, along with, of course, the batteries and the little box that will give you the software intelligence. And these things can be pointed. It's automatically pointing to the best sort of point in the sky. Now, this is the internet usage. If you look at that, we're talking about the developed world, which is this pink here. So this is the number of people per 100 that are connected now in the developed part. But these are the numbers of the less developed part, and very low here for a lot of these countries and villages which are very, very poor. So you can see we need to go a long way to bridge that gap of connectivity. This is by regions. You can say world population is about 6.5 billion. In 27, it's going to be 7.5 billion. Users worldwide, only 48%. That's users in the developed world, 41%. Users in the developed world, 81%. So you can see only half the world gets connected here. And this is by continent, what the connectivity is. You can have a look at your own time. Now, why do we need to sort of also think about data? Because this network carries data on it. And data, we know, is all these numbers that these devices work on. And of course, that traffic is increasing by leaps and bounds by the day. So we are talking in terms of this scale here. Now, a gigabyte is 1 megabit, 1 million bits. A giga is a billion, tera is a trillion, and then quadrillion. So you can see it is humongous numbers of data requirement that needs to be met. And this is why we need to have a powerful means of being able to connect so that the two points, the originating and the destination points, need to be able to have that capacity to be able to make it work at the two ends. So we need to have that, what I would call in simple terms, big pipes to be able to, and this 5G is one of them. It has tremendous amount of capacity. And then, of course, you're going to have 6G. I think China has already introduced 6G. And we are going to be having, the 5G soon. Now, 5G hasn't come into in a big way yet because of this Huawei fiasco that Trump started off with, where he's made this thing into a political football, saying, because the reason why he did that is because the USA especially is 2 years behind in technology as far as 5G is concerned. And Huawei was already ahead, and because it's a Chinese company, he decided to sort of have this trade war with it and put restrictions. So in a way, we are going to be 2 years behind the rest of those people who adopted Huawei. In fact, the only country that is adopted, we have partially adopted 5G because, but Germany has also, I think, adopted a bit of it, but USA has not adopted it at all. Now, this is a picture of, when you launch the satellite up there, 60 of them as it go, they're all in a line, but because they have intelligence built into them, they position themselves as they move into the right sort of plane in the orbit. This is the connectivity, once the satellites are there, they'll be able to connect from one region of the earth to the other. Now, this is the lady who's the president of SpaceX. She's an engineer and is able to sort of simply say that as far as Starlink is concerned, which is still part of SpaceX, they are looking at it from the point of view of making it into an income generating proposition, and so that they can fund their SpaceX program and be able to extend the service of this connectivity to every part of the world. So it's a real grand and noble vision as well, not just making money. Yeah. So what we have now is already, because of these beta test is underway. Now, here in UK also, we can connect to the Starlink, except, I haven't applied for it because I've got a lot of trees around me and I need to be able to have a little bit more open space to be able to point to the sky and not have signal interference. But anyway, this is already the figure. I think this is a month old or 2 months old. By the end of the year, they'll have 500,000 users already. Now, this is just talking about essentially the type of structure that is there, so that it gives you polar connectivity as well, not just. So it's going to be a type of network which is going to be quite extensive. Here's the polar region, and even here you can take a dish and be able to connect to the Starlink. Now, what's it going to be costing us? The speed is what we can get, about 100 to 150 megabit speeds. It's going to cost about $99 per month. And it's going to give us that speed over here, 50 to 150. And the latency is only about 20 to 40 milliseconds, which is about, hardly instant, which is going to be instantaneous. So you won't feel the delay. So affordable. Now, here, I must say that supposing, $1,100 a month may be quite a lot for some poor sort of villages, but they can all share. A whole village can share with one dish and be able to connect to that, so they can afford it. That's all this required, a little dish here. He's talking about the speeds that are attained already in that test. And these are all the launches that they have done. They do about 2 launches every month. Because they're reusable, they come and pick up the satellites and go up again to have them orbit. Now you can order them. As I said, you can go to the website and put your name down. And there's a waiting list at the moment because they're not producing fast enough at the moment, but they still can meet your order relatively quickly. Now, it's very important now, but what is the connection between these two? I told you earlier on, SpaceX has the reusable rockets, and therefore they can put thousands of these Starlink satellites in orbit. And that revenue that they get from this is what is going to fund their effort to go to Mars. So you can see, being a private company, they don't have these, big sort of deep pockets like the state has. And of course, they have to generate revenue, and the Starlink is going to be able to generate enough revenue for space to be colonized through SpaceX efforts. So here we are. This is a stepping stone towards a self-sustaining city in Mars. So you can see he's not just having a dream, he's actually figuring out how to realize this dream. And because he's got an engineer's mind, he's going to be able to come up with solutions. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop here for the moment and then go for Q&A. And we'll be able to then, I'll stop share for the moment. And then we go for a viewing, a gallery view. Okay, and we are still recording, so fine. So I suggest you unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yes, can I ask Shafiq?
Yes.
I'm still not quite clear about 4G and 5G. What exactly is implied by G?
Generation. The first generation is 1G when we had our telephones and the wires, you know, and the
Yes,
rotary dial and so on. That's the first generation of telephones.
yes.
And we connected it through wires. And BT came and put the wires at our home, and we had a telephone service. Then 2G started to come in when we had the second generation, is when we started to get a little bit more smarter mobile phones, mobile which you could port from one place to another. They weren't fixed, you know, in one place. And the third 3G came in when they started to exchange a lot of data. When computers started to exchange data through these lines, that became 3G. And 4G is what we have with our smartphones, being able to use it wherever we are. And these signals are picked up by the, you know, dishes and the antennas that are there of a telephone network. And 5G is a much faster connectivity. So it's really the technology and the infrastructure of this telephone network that gives us this name of 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. As the speed grows, the functionality that we can do with our phones and so on, that grows. Mm-hmm. And now with self-driving cars that are there in the pipeline, that type of connectivity is even more important, so as to have the cars intelligent enough to react instantaneously when the other car is nearby and so on. So you see that the G is very important part of this whole thing. It's a generational type of measure for measuring technology.
What sort of G do you think I'm in contact with at present?
At the moment,
4G.
If you've got a smartphone with you,
yes,
you're using 4G.
I see.
4G,
but I
right.
haven't got as far as 5G yet.
No, because 5G has not really taken off too much here because, you know, as I said, Huawei is the one which was offering that service, that network, which UK started to put in, but then Trump came in and said, no, they're stealing the data. That it's a Chinese company. We don't want them to have that technology advantage. And because, you know, the West and UK and USA didn't have that technology of 5G. So they stopped Huawei. So Huawei can offer only a limited 5G capability because the strategic, you know, the watchdog over here, when they were looking at Huawei as to how much data can it actually make it vulnerable for our public that can be taken over by Chinese company, they said, well, you know, there are certain bits of it which we don't want. That's the core bits, but the other bits we can use. So it's only a partial utilization of Huawei at the moment. And we don't know whether it's going to be a fully still, you know, forbidden from operating in the West, because that was a Trump sort of bogey that he had in mind. But I don't think every country is going to be following that practice. And they'll introduce this 5G very quickly into their countries.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Yes, Pam.
I think Janos wanted to say something. He's got his hand up.
Oh, where? Oh, sorry, Janos, I haven't seen you. Where are you? Okay. Oh, yes, Janos, go ahead. Can you hear me, Janos? For some reason.
A couple of questions. First of all, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
There are already thousands of there. Are they going to bump into each other? The second problem is getting very. The second question is: this is a chain. A chain is as strong as the weakest link. What happens if one or two of them are being
good question. One is, of course,
pushed out or collapsed? How?
Yeah, I got your questions, Janos. Good questions. These satellites, as I said, they've got software in them and they're intelligent. And secondly, they're a network, they're not a chain. a network means that if one satellite doesn't work, then it just bypasses that and connects to the other one. And because they have their own motive power, they can position themselves again and again. They've got this little ion, it's a sort of technology that has a type of engine that gives it a little bit of power to shift its orbit a bit. So it is intelligent and it's safe. And it's safe because when it has done its sort of lifetime of service, say 5 years or whatever, or when it needs to be replaced, it can sink to a lower orbit and be sort of burn away, and 99% of it gets burnt away, except for the laser part, which is really, it doesn't burn. So it's a very small part that is up there. So as far as space debris is concerned, it is in fact minimal. And this is one of the requirements of FCC now. Any satellite that is put up needs to be not creating debris in space. So is that okay for you, Janos?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, one of the other things about the Starship is that Starship is so big that one is now even thinking about making this as a garbage collector as well. It can open its sort of big mouth, the Starship, and collect a lot of this debris that is going around and bring it back to Earth or let it burn somewhere.
Brilliant.
So it can sort of clear up the debris.
Can I ask a question? Apparently, I've just worked it out. It's only £71 a month for Starlink when at the moment, and it will probably be cheaper soon, won't it?
Well, one of the things about Starlink is it is much more targeted for people who are a bit more remote areas. Because these telephone companies and even Camden, for instance, is spending lots of money to put this fiber cable. And because of the density of the cities, we are able to get high speed at lower cost. But if you take somebody who, in the farm, he doesn't have any connectivity except through a telephone network maybe. But because he wants to go to internet as well and not have cost, he'll be quite happy to pay £70 a month for his internet connectivity, which is going to be quite remote. You see?
If you compare it with Virgin Media, it's not much difference.
That's right. Well,
and
apart from the fact that you don't have to deal with anybody like in the Virgin network, I'd rather sort of go to Starlink any day.
The other question I have, you said 12 countries have approved. So I didn't catch which ones. It was the US.
Yeah, the ones that are already doing it is Canada, USA, UK, and some of these countries which are in the Northern Hemisphere.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, if one goes to Starlink, one can place an order. If you give the address, they will sort of enter it in there and they will get a box and you can connect it up. But I don't want to do it because I've got too many trees around my block.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know which way I have to point, but I think it's going to be fairly accessible anyway if I put it on the roof.
I think I'll wait till my contract's over next year and then go for it.
Well, at the moment, you see, if your borough is doing what Camden is doing, Camden is giving us fiber optic, in every home. So I just had that installed a few weeks ago. It's a very thin wire that comes into your home. It's amazing how easily it comes in and connects, and then all of a sudden, the speed increased by twice as much compared to Virgin, which came in by cable.
We're not getting it here in Haringey, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. And the other thing that Camden has done, which is a good thing as well, is that they're going in for these electric charging points for Tesla cars, which are going to be sunk into the footpath. And they'll give you a little lance-like thing. So you go there and press that, and it pops out and you can connect your car to it. and then it goes back into the pavement.
Is
So
that
it's-
for all electric vehicles?
That's for electric vehicles, yeah.
Because my son's got an electric van. I'll tell him about that. Yeah. he
Yeah,
has-
Camden is starting to put that in now. I just read about it.
Great.
So we are sort of fairly up to date on this. We've got fiber optic, and
Yeah.
we've got this pop-up Tesla charging stations.
But for any electric vehicle, not just for Tesla, for any electric vehicle.
Yes, I think so. But because Tesla is the one who's setting the trend,
Yeah.
the new ones will have to adapt to their type of plug. You see?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Great news.
Yeah, that's great news. Yeah, Janos, you still have your hand raised. Okay, we'll let that stay there for a while.
Exciting future.
Yeah, well, I consider that the technology is going to deliver on the fronts that politicians fail at every turn.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I put more faith in Elon Musk than any of these political leaders.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When the rockets have delivered the satellites and returned to Earth, are they steerable? So can they return to Earth where they are easily recoverable? I mean, I really don't understand, rocket landings.
Yeah, you see these rockets, when they go up,
Yeah,
they've got this part which is the payload, and they deposit that payload into orbit, which is
Yeah.
all the satellites, and the
Yeah.
launching vehicle comes back. It's got a little bit of fuel in it, and it comes back and lands back in its pad, from where it took off.
oh, right, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing.
That's the technology that is quite wonderful. In fact, nowadays, you see in Texas, Elon Musk has started to make something called Starbase.
Mhm.
Starbase is something that will have these type of vertical takeoff and landing type of rockets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when we had manned space vehicles and so on, it was always a question of were they going to land somewhere in the middle of the Pacific or God knows where, and they had to be recovered. And now they can just come back to where they took off from.
That's right. Absolutely
Amazing.
right.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think in my last, I showed a clip of these two Falcon launching things coming back, both coming back and landing there absolutely perfectly and in time as well.
Right. I know I have tracked you back and found lots and lots of your previous contributions to look up. But, there just isn't time to listen to all these programs. But I know they're there, and I will, I will.
Yeah, no, I just mentioned that because there is a little clip that I show in the beginning of how these rockets come back and land.
Right.
And now we are going to be having tests are underway where the Starship itself will come and land, because these two ones that are landing back and reusable ones are called Falcon 9 rockets. They're smaller, they carry only about 60. But the Starship has about, a huge amount of capacity, and it can carry 400 of them.
Oh my God.
And that also is under test at the moment to come back. And it has come back and landed in tests, but it hasn't sort of delivered a payload and then come back and landed as yet. So that's going to happen sometime this year.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful.
All right. Anybody interested in having the internet of this sort?
Yeah.
Or satellite? Yeah, I know, Pam, you want to.
And we'll be able to use our phones on it, hopefully. That would be useful when you go to a place like the Western Isles in Scotland and you've got no reception.
Exactly, especially places like Scotland, for instance. We are large areas which are probably don't have the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, any country, especially the poorer countries.
And in Cornwall as well, there's certain places you just can't. And one place I went to, I had to go in the middle of the field to get reception, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, even now, if I go to Hampstead Heath, where I am near to it, I can't get my phone to work in certain places of Hampstead Heath.
Really?
No, because the connectivity is not very good. Yeah.
Maybe that's why I got lost on the heath with my Google Maps. Maybe that was why.
Yeah. Well, because, I'm still using Virgin. This is my last vestige of Virgin connectivity, which is still on my phone. I'm going to have to ditch that very quickly and go for something which has a better coverage. You see, there are different services that give you different types of coverage. And Virgin at the moment in Hampstead Heath doesn't give me coverage, or in certain parts of it.
There's a surprise.
Yeah, well, this last showman piece that took place, Virgin and Bezos, Branson and Bezos.
Yeah.
I mean, for about 2 days they had the coverage, and then after that everybody started to sort of say, this is just PR stunt.
Yeah, well, it was. It was.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyone else have anything that you'd like to ask? If not, I believe it's all crystal clear.
Yes. Thank you for saying it very well. Thank you.
Some of us have limited capacity and just can't take it in. But, it's amazing. I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that my next talk is going to be even more sort of dramatic in some ways, because we're now going to be talking about solar city.
Oh my God.
Yeah, all
okay,
energy.
see you there.
Fantastic future. Okay, so shall I close the session now? It's nearly an hour up, and just a few more minutes left.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Have a
Sophie.
good day
Thank
and
you.
enjoy the sun that's come out.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Ah, God. So that is leave. Oh, come on.